Sam Mendes made a huge splash in 1999 with his first film, American Beauty. The film earned an indecent sum of money and won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. First time out for Sam, and an Oscar on the first try. The film was a phenomenon. Thus, the biggest question became, how would Mendes follow up? He got together with 3, it says here, up-and-coming actors named Paul Newman, Tom Hanks, and Jude Law, and the result is Road to Perdition. Here's a trailer from the film.
This is the life we chose, the life we lead. And there is only one guarantee. None of us will see heaven. Michael could.
Joining me now is director Sam Mendes and the 3 stars of the film, Paul Newman, Tom Hanks, and Jude Law. Welcome. First to Mr. Mendes. I guess it's a hallmark of a really good movie that there are many interpretations of what the movie is about. For example, yesterday in the Los Angeles Times walk-up to it, they stressed the Catholic guilt of the film. In your remarks in the New York Times yesterday, you talked about the 2 levels of the film. The obvious thing we just saw in the trailer, the father and son thing, but underneath it all, again, guilt, redemption, terror, all those things. If you were to just put it to you and say you've got 30 seconds, what do you really think this movie is about?
I think really, the bottom line is it's about fathers and sons. I mean, I think it's about how you can protect the generation beneath you from the fate that you've had. And I think it's about the secret worlds your parents inhabit that you're never really given access to. But I also think it's about children and the way they deal with violence. I think it's about whether watching and seeing violence makes you yourself violent. But there's a part of the film that's also a kind of love letter or nostalgic love poem to the gangster movies that I grew up with, and presumably everyone else around this table grew up with as well, which I held in awe as a child. And that goes not only for the obvious gangster movies of the 70s, i.e. The Godfather and Once Upon a Time in America, but also for the gangster movies of the 30s and 40s. The kind of unsentimental simplicity of those stories was something that I also loved about this. So it's all of those things, and as you say, it's a very it has ambivalence in it, which is hopefully something that, well, I hope it has ambivalence in it, and it's something that movies, generally speaking, shy away from, liking as they do in 2 hours simple stories and black and white issues.
Well, isn't it one of the things about gangster movies is that basically they don't usually have a lot of backstory. I mean, somehow we meet James Cagney and he's got a machine gun in his hand, and we're off on that ride for, in that case, less than 90 minutes. Wouldn't it be, Tom, that there's something more here than there is to a traditional gangster film?
Well, Sam, yes, there is. Sam has some secret agenda that he's not going to come forward with at this table. His secret movie that he made. But I think the reason that many of us were involved with it is because, on one hand, it's a pure genre movie. I mean, there's all the icons, the hats and the guns and the cars and the bootleg whiskey and what have you. But then there's this house that we say our blessing to before we say our blessing before we sit down to the meal. There's beads in his pocket, the rosary beads, and he stops off at the appropriate church. So I think the delicious thing about a thing like this is the you start off sort of with this familiarity of where all these icons are in place, and then you almost then do slide off to the backstory later on in the film. We don't find out about it until 20 minutes in that something happened that made Mr. Rooney my father, and something happened that made him take care of us, and that we have a wonderful life and a wonderful family. It's the first time we've seen it. We even heard about it in the film, because we certainly have yet to see this wonderful home and this wonderful life that he's provided for us. It's actually
and yet there is in Mr. Rooney's character, there's a sort of geniality about him when we first meet him. There's a kindness. He's doing little coin tricks with Michael Sullivan's boys. He's a genial fellow, ostensibly, and I find that kind of one of the delights of your performance.
Well, I think gangsters generally can be genial. We certainly have seen that with most of the corporate leaders that we've known to come and love in the last 3 or 4 years. There's no reason why he can't be genial. And they've said pretty clearly what the story is about. But to my character was really this, the struggle of loyalty to an adopted son, to a real son, and the torment that goes with that, and that was fun to play around.
Well, we have a clip here of Paul and Tom, and I think it illuminates the sort of basic thing we're talking about, which is the father-son relationship. So we can roll that clip and move on from that.
Well, you turned out. You can't protect them forever. If it wasn't this, it'd be something else. Natural law. Sons are put on this earth to trouble their fathers.
Is that true, Tom?
No, I don't think so. I think they're put on earth to confound them, certainly, but more delight them more often than not. I'm delighted by all three of mine. Not that I understand them a whit, but I actually think it's put on earth to entertain us. Sometimes it's a comedy, and sometimes it's a car wreck, but by and large.
What about that scene, Paul? I mean, it seems to me, powerful almost in what it doesn't say. I mean, it's a very, in a certain way, an underwritten scene. I mean, it's not laying everything out in a neat package, is it?
Well, that's the delight of the picture, I think. There is an ambivalent quality to all of the characters, and I must say, it's in these days, it's remarkable that you look forward to getting up at 5:45 in the morning to go to work. And you're on the set, and 18 hours later, you crawl back into bed again, and you feel that, you've learned something. Some ideas that you had about scenes are immediately shot down by the director, and this trajectory that you worked very carefully on. But that was the fun of it, and then to try to take what you get and own it, and then make it part of your philosophy and not his anymore. It's an interesting emotional and intellectual game to be played.
Is there a process that you can describe?
Is
there a process you can describe by which you come to own a part?
Well, if you can explain it, it's probably no good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can accept that. There are some other actors here. What do you think, Jude?
About the process.
How do you take on how do you own a part?
I don't know if you ever do, particularly, because you may think you do, but then everyone who sees your performance has a different interpretation, and should have a different interpretation, because it obviously triggers different feelings and different instincts in the viewer. Again, I think it's more down to playing the part and trying to fit the part into the whole that is the fulfillment. You know, that's where you find the fulfillment. But actually owning it, it's like owning your own personality. I don't think you ever necessarily do that either. You know, that's constantly changing and growing, hopefully, and shrinking.
Well, Tom, in this role, it seems to me that I've never seen you more austere, more hidden, more reserved. There was in Private Ryan a secret about that man, but this is really secrets, it seems to me. What do you feel about that?
Well, we discussed the concept of the rationalizations that human beings do to explain all their behaviors, and to me this was Michael Sullivan had rationalized his ability to keep his professional life away from his private life, and the only real way to do that was to never ever talk about it, never ever give yourself away on either front. So what becomes what would seem to be a very taciturn exterior, like for example the scene we just saw with, I mean, I think is very telling that John Rooney says, it's tough when you see that for the first time, but you turned out all right. Well, I immediately thought, well, so when was the first time? When he was 12? When he was 14? Did he kill somebody? Did I kill somebody when I was 16? Was that the first time I had to do it, or 18? And so it ends up becoming this thing that human beings are incredibly able to do, is to forget everything they've just done in order to rationalize the place they are in the presence. And for myself, it was a matter of not giving anything away, staying as close to the vest as possible.
Until the incidents of this story begin unfolding, do you think that Michael had any particular desire to not be part of Mr. Rooney's mob? Do you think he had thoughts that he kept to himself of wishing to be a different person doing a different sort of job?
I think he reconciled that, rationalized it away a long, long time ago, and he said he's been able to transmute it into a noble pursuit. I am loyal, I am loving, I am caring, I obey, I do what I'm told, and I'm so self-disciplined that I'm not going to complain or wish anything else for my life.
And above all, of course, he takes care of his little family there in their nice little suburban house.
Their house that was built for 8 kids and they only have 2. Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I have never actually seen in a movie something that so captures the chill of it in the winter and the largeness of a city like Chicago when you first come to it, all of that. And that strikes me as pretty remarkable, considering that you're English and probably didn't have too much experience of the Middle West until you started.
None at all. But I think that's a wonderful thing when you come to somewhere completely fresh, you know, and you are a blank canvas. I mean, I think that there's a huge imaginative leap anyway that you're making when you're taking yourself back to 1930. So whether you're English or American, you're still having to reimagine a universe because things aren't like that anymore.
I didn't have to imagine anything about it.
Oh, yes. Is that true? Well, one of the things that's characteristic of the Middle West, it seems to me, is that there are lots of places in it that have remained utterly unchanged in the decades since I've left there. I mean, if I go back to the block I lived on, it hasn't changed a bit. The houses are all there, the trees are a little bigger, but that's about it. It's sort of Brigadoon-y in a way.
Well, there was an aspect of, I mean, I wanted to try and shoot it on location, partly because the landscape is a character in the movie, and as you say, the vast kind of expanse of flat land under that just blank winter skies and all of that, the bleak poetry, and it's very, very I find it very beautiful. And then I'm also if you don't find, you know, rain and cloud beautiful, then you better not live in England, because I live with that 11 months of the year. But there is something very stirring about it, and you know, I find it I found it really was influential in the kind of seeped into the characters. You know what I mean? It goes in through their skin, and also we shot in freezing cold, and it was easy to imagine ourselves back, you know, 70 years ago.
How was the freezing cold out
It was
there?
exactly as our director describes. It was brutally, brutally cold. I mean, the crew, I mean, the magnificent crew. There was one time it was actually snowing, but it was supposed to rain in the movie. It was at the house. We had fake snow on the ground, but the rain was supposed to come and wash it away, but then it started snowing at 3 o'clock in the morning. So you have real snow, fake rain coming down on you. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. It's the middle of February. It's not a real pleasant place to be.
One of the things, the aspects of this movie that strikes me, and it is particularly focused on the child, the boy, is that, among other things, it's a journey out of darkness into light. I mean, that is to say, all of the early going of this movie is bleak, it's cold. If it's not snowing, it's raining. It's always, it seems to me, night, or at least, twilight. And then slowly, as the relationship between the father and the son begins to warm, the picture seems to me to begin to warm. I take it that's not accidental?
Yeah, I mean, it's very intentional. It moves from winter into spring, certainly. I mean, it arrives at spring very, very late on, and they are travelling from darkness into light, and the last place that they're travelling to, which in the context of the movie is a town called Perdition, which also, in another context, means hell, literally means hell. But the town they're travelling to is a place in their memory, is a mythic place of beauty, and it's on Lake Michigan, and there's a sense of peace, and that kind of that's where they're leading towards. And there's a reason why. I mean, we're not just shot it in the snow because it looks nice. There's a reason why we arrive at the beginning of the movie in a frozen environment. It's emotionally frozen. It's exactly as Tom describes. It's completely set. It's a very still, very frozen house, and the movement of the movie is away from that as the weather thaws, emotions thaw too, without wanting to be too prosaic about it. But it is the case that gradually the humanizing of the central character takes place, and around him the movie allows a certain amount of color. It's a very monochromatic film, and the palette is very limited. And it's not, the flowers don't burst into bloom in the last 10 minutes of the film or anything, but there is a sense of life beginning again, and that's leading again to the last image of the child, and I think that's deliberate, and again that's set from very early in the film, set in motion from very early on.
There's a wild card in this movie, and he's a very wild card, and that's the character played by Jude Law. And we have a clip that introduces that character to Tom Hanks's character, and it's a clip, I think, just pregnant with menace. So here is that clip.
I should hope not. Always fascinated me, the look of him. You ever seen one?
Yeah.
Sorry for you. Terrible thing. But it sure makes you feel alive, don't it?
Jude, you seem to me in this picture, schematically speaking, to be the force of modernism, anarchy. Everyone else has an explicable motive. Yours is less explicable and much more a thing, as I say, of anarchy, of modernism, of simply having a something you love to do and doing it no matter what the social or moral consequences of that are.
Yeah, it's true. It was very interesting what Tom was saying, that no matter how efficient and precise and accurate a mobster Michael is, he has this sort of root and escape in his family that he can hide all of that and be a father and be a husband. And Maguire has none of that. Maguire is out and out a killer, really. I mean, his only cover is perhaps that he enjoys then taking photos of the bodies he's killed. I mean, but that's a kind of twist rather than an excuse. So, I mean, Sam and I discussed this early on, that in a way he's also sort of a reminder of the reality of the world that these three men, this whole film is really set in, which is the world of where men kill each other for gain or for business or economic gain, you know. And it's funny how you can rationalise what gangsters or what businessmen or what people do, but there's often a kind of gut truth to what it's all about, and it often comes down to power and unfortunately violence. And Maguire is very much out on a limb in that way. He's paid to kill people and enjoys it and relishes it and enjoys being good at that. And has no necessarily kind of human disguise to it.
Is he entirely outside of any known moral order?
Well, I'm sure he has some sort of order in his own. I think he has a kind of artistic order, actually, because I think his aim is actually to get a perfect still. You know, there's a certain kind of creativity to him, which probably excuses what he does to himself. But I always pictured that he doesn't have a family. He certainly doesn't have.
What we see of
children.
his life is a sort of a miserable little life, isn't it? I mean, it's developing his pictures, and that's, as far as we know, all he has to do in
That's
life.
right. No relationships, particularly, other than with the people he works for and with. And it's a kind of reminder, I think, of the brutality and the threat that this world operates under. And one could even ask the question, I mean, in a way, what is the difference between Michael Sullivan and Harlan Maguire? In a way, there isn't any, that they're both paid to kill. But that then raises the kind of moral issue of the film.
There is, in a sense, I mean, it's just what you said earlier, Jude. The difference is family.
His family.
You know, somebody has somebody else depending on him who he needs to protect, and the other person is in a kind of moral anarchy, as you say. And in a way, halfway through the film, when you think, is this about as bad as it gets, is to be Sullivan or Rooney struggling to try and hold it together when you know you've killed people, when you know you're going to hell, when you're clinging on to the last vestiges of your religious belief, or some order that gives you some sense that you might achieve something other than damnation. And then along comes this character who just is absolute rock bottom, and the notion of the moral anarchist and the terrorist was something that was more alien to us when we made this film than it is now. I mean, someone who utterly loves destruction, for whom that is an achievement, for whom that is something to be wished for. That's not so alien to us now, and I think that to me, the fact that he makes art out of it actually accentuates that. Do you know what I mean? The fact that he sees no, you know, at the end of the day, his first scene is, you know, he encounters a body. He's got a nice shot set up, and the body seems still to be alive. You know, but he's on his own, so it's just so much easier for him to finish the guy off and take the photograph than to, you know, to make the guy live again. You know, so he kills him, but there's no sense of regret or, you know. But in the first clip that you showed of Tom and Paul, there is. When he says, well, you know, you turned out okay, he says to Sullivan, and Sullivan just looks down. There is a sense in that silence, and there is a sense of regret about how he's lived his life. He would rather not have seen what he saw as a young boy, and now he's extremely upset that his own son has seen that. But he won't blame Rooney for that. He blames himself, and he's accepted that responsibility. But here's someone who has no... there are no connections with the outside world. He deliberately lives in a cell. The dark room, you know, is something that Michael Powell used as an image of complete isolation from the world in Peeping Tom, and it's something that I turned to Jude to watch before making this film, because the sort of sense in which, you know, a photographer can keep company with his pictures, do you know what I mean, and that is his only route, and that actually stops him communicating with the outside world and gives him a sense of order which is not present at all in reality. That's something that I asked, that we talked about.
It was also very specific of that period. I mean, it was a time when a lot of documentation was going on of everything. It was, you know, social and, you know, business, sport. I mean, it was very prolific in the 30s.
I mean, and the photographs that hang on Maguire's wall are real photographs of the period, and people say, "Wow, the way you set up those photographs is just." I didn't set them up. The photographer, the crime photographer, set them up. He found the dead bodies. But what's interesting about the photographs?
Books and books.
I know there are, exactly. But what's interesting about the photographs is that he has rearranged the dead bodies to make a better photograph. That's what's interesting to me about them. Not that a dead body in an empty space has a strange poetry all of its own, but that when it's displeased the photographer, he's moved the hat and rearranged the dead body to make a better composition. You know?
Right.
and it seems to me that when you live with death to that degree, you simply at a certain point you become, you lose your moral structure. You lose anything that might tell you what death means. Right. Whereas I think Sullivan understands right to the end what death means. You know what I mean? He understands that. I think Maguire, there is no meaning for these things. I think it's just, it's a fly, you swat it. Wouldn't you say?
Well, that's a question for Paul. Is how culpable is Mr. Rooney? How much does he know, morally speaking? How much does he? I mean, he, after all, is the ultimate man responsible for bringing this guy into the story. How much does he know, and how much does he willfully ignore? And I mean, he's a morally ambivalent figure. But the question really is, what does he know, and what does he think about what's going on?
Well, I should probably take the fifth.
Okay.
But it's happening right in front of us. I mean, every single day you see this moral vacuum. It's bankruptcy, and there was a kind of at the core of them is they do all those superficial things that we've come to admire. He's friendly and he has all those external qualities that we admire, but in his core, what he's doing is simply immoral, unethical, and yet people will admire him. Mm-hmm. And if they admire him, then we've made a terrible mistake, because in a way we've made a hero out of these people that we put on the screen and have made 35 feet tall.
Well, you seem, this is the second time in this discussion, you keep making this analogy between Mr. Rooney and, I don't know, the head of Enron. Were such analogies in your mind as you were playing this part?
Well, I wouldn't claim to be that prescient. But
well, there had been corporate crooks before.
Well, listen, it's someone who's morally bankrupt, but puts on a very good show, and I think these people really kid themselves. I mean, they really truly believe that what they're doing is pretty much okay. I think they sleep well at night.
And you think Mr. Rooney sleeps well at night?
Yes, he sleeps like a baby.
In your thinking about this part, the other son, the son who commits the murders, and had he always been a plague on you and your house as you thought about him? Was he always the guy that in your mind was invidiously compared to the much nicer Tom Hanks fellow?
No, he wasn't. Otherwise, there would be no. I mean, the dichotomy there is that it's not just blood, but there must have been something of consequence and affection between them at one point, and it just soured.
So at some point, these two boys were perhaps equal in your mind as growing up as.
Otherwise, it would be no contest.
And what of you in this? I mean, he isn't even your brother, but your presumptive brother in this. I mean, had that been a long, bad relationship between the two of you? Had you always suspected him of having a psychopathically bad temper? Or was this a big surprise when this incident happens and murder wills out?
I don't think he had always had this psychopathic kind of temper but I think at a very early age, 7 or 8, whatever it was, I realized that, you know what, he can fly off the handle every now and again. I think there is a real, even with him, even at the early age, that we were probably, almost the twins. I mean, we were probably more or less. I think it was a little easier for Michael because he's the adopted son in the house, but he gets the same size bedroom. But I think without a question, he said, I need to be careful here. I need to be careful with this guy. It's a good thing that I can beat him up, but I'm always going to have to worry about. I'm always going to lock the door behind me when I'm leaving him alone. But had at the same time had made my peace with working with him as a peer and all that, and realized that there's probably a degree of friction when essentially Dad says, "Take Michael with you." I know that's you know.
Yeah, that's
I'm sorry that I'm in that
That's
position,
a moment in there because he doesn't want Michael along because, of course, he has a whole issue with this guy that Michael is unaware of, and which is too complicated to go into now,
it's a toughie.
and isn't
It's part of that Sam Mendes secret movie that
yeah
will be discussed on some later day.
which he does keep bringing up this secret movie. One of the charms of this movie is, of course, as you and the boy move out into the more Middle Western hinterlands and start robbing banks, which again has a complicated plot thing that I think need not go into, except that it brings an almost Bonnie and Clyde-ish touch of humor and good nature to this movie. I mean, and it comes at I think very propitiously. I mean, the movie is moving in in dark and even dismaying directions, and then suddenly we'll see a little hint of this in the clip we're about to play. Michael and his son begin a more cheerful life, if you will, of knocking over little banks in the Middle West, and this is one of their depredations coming up in this clip.
Call it a handling charge. Tell Chicago I took it. But if I read about this in the papers, if I read about the savings of some innocent farmers being wiped out by a heartless bank robber, I won't be happy. Good afternoon.
You really trust me not to say anything?
Always trust a bank manager.
I think maybe we ought to just mention the really outstanding cinematography of this movie, and maybe Sam, you'd like to say something.
I agree with you. It's a shame you can't be around the table with us, because he played as big a part in the way the movie looks and feels as any of us did, really. I mean, it's Conrad Hall who shot this movie, also shot American Beauty, and also shot Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid that Paul was in, and Cool Hand Luke as well, in fact. So he and Paul go back further than he and I, but I just feel he's a master of his art, and in his hands it is an art, whereas in many people's hands it's merely a craft.
And yet this movie has an extraordinarily different look than American Beauty or Butch and Sundance. Can you speak at all about how what he does, or is that mysterious to you?
It's the last kind of 5% of the process that is mysterious to me, because you can talk as much as you want about how you want to compose a shot, you can draw it, you can storyboard it, all of those things, which we did to a certain degree on this film. But it's that last 5% of magic. It's the way he will make it impossible to see the walls in certain scenes. He will create a sense of mystery and darkness and threat out of almost nothing. And you get the feeling he's kind of forgotten more than most of us will ever remember about the way in which you need to put pictures together. It's his lighting, and it's about the mystery and the art of lighting and how light works emotionally as well as pictorially. And I think he tells the story of the characters through what he shows of them and what he doesn't show. But he's also brave enough not to show things, and a lot of the time it's the case with a lot of the violence in the movie. We don't see the violence, but also parts of people's faces, and there's a kind of and then the way in which he controls the palette of the film. I think he would secretly have loved to have shot it in black and white. But I actually think that the soft noir look that he has and that we managed to find, which shifts, as you say, halfway through the film, is more moving and less rigid than black and white.
Well, one of the things that struck me in watching this film was how much of its meaning really comes out of the imagery and the play of the light in the picture. That doesn't mean to say that I don't have inordinate regard for all of the acting that went on in it, but is there a moment in there where you say, Wow, I've got a lot of help going on here. maybe I can just.
My first time with him, I'd walk onto the set anytime we're at a new location, anytime we're in a new scene, and thought, well, what did Vandermeer paint today? How gorgeous is it going to be? There's a scene in a farmhouse, and we came, and they're in their tents, all tented in. It's during the day. You walk in. I said, it was so beautiful. I asked Conrad, hey, what's the kerosene lamp budget on this movie? Because this is all lit in this perfectly golden glow. Is all totally natural. I found as an actor that a lot of times in films, the master, the quote-unquote master, is the least important business of the day because you're saving everything up for some other. The director just wants to get some sense of establishment of space and geography, and then you move on. I found that with these, particularly in the Rooney house and over and over again, that the master was where the hard work began, because you knew this is going to be in the movie. The vast scale of this is telling an incredibly important part of the film, and so there was no skating through any part of the day. You worked very hard in the biggest, widest shots because it was just so beautiful from every angle. Not just over by the camera. Sometimes you go over by the camera and see what looks so great. You just walk in anywhere, and it was just spectacular.
Has Connie changed any over the years since you've known him?
Well, they've said it as sweetly as it can be said. I mean, it's whether it's the 5% or the 10%. He's a magician. That's all.
No, I agree. Finally, kind of winding back to where we began, this is a movie about a father and a son, and a father and a son. Both of them in a degree of torment. And part of the way it moves toward light is toward a very gentle, scene-by-scene relaxation of Tom's tension with the boy, until finally they can actually do a joke. And the last of the clips we have here is them doing their joke.
Trying to do a joke. So when do I get my share of the money?
Well, how much do you want?
$200.
Okay, deal.
That's just how fun-loving and warm as it gets.
Oh, but just the patience of that scene.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the luxury of the patience to take time to sort things out. I mean, it's a luxury you don't find in many films and in the populations that go to make the films. They're always hustling and always in a rush about everything. And this had such a sense of allowance, of luxury, and it doesn't happen very often.
I'm really glad you raised that point, because it's one of the things that's striking, even at the very beginning of the film, is the leisure of that, and that sense of that little boy, coming home. And I mean, it's a long scene, and not a lot is happening in that scene, and there is a spaciousness about that's really quite wonderful, and quite, as Paul suggests, quite unique in an American film these days, which, they do tend to sort of slam along, don't they? Was that pace something you sort of sensed, the pace of 1931 being somewhat different from the pace of 2002? Is it something you wanted to convey?
I'm not sure if it's a period thing. I think it's the storytelling thing. I mean, I think there's a confusion sometimes about the speed at which a story moves and the amount of story being delivered. Mm-hmm. This movie comes in at under 2 hours, but there's a lot of story in it. And sometimes you're made to feel that a story is happening very fast. In actual fact, nothing's happening. And there is an attempt in the first half an hour of the film to make an audience lean in to the film rather than lean back and say, okay, it's going to be served up on a plate, you know. And there is a response against the kind of cutting for the sake of it. And as Tom says, I mean, there are certain scenes that, you know, I didn't take coverage in that scene you just saw. That was just a two-shot. It meant that we did a lot of takes of it, as I remember. But because I was trying to find that very precise pacing, and you know, I can't shift performances inside the take. Obviously, I can't cut to anything else. And also, I was hoping, and I didn't discover that this would happen until the first preview of the movie, that people would laugh during it. You know, and so there was space in there also for laughter. But I think that there is a kind of a attempt at a hypnotic and a slower rhythm of cutting. And to pull the audience in, to reel them in slowly, and so that the violence explodes out of that and is genuinely shocking. And that when you cut to a close-up, it has meaning, you know, particularly in a movie where the central character is so distant for so long.
Well, I think that's, you know, where the really powerful poignance of the ending of this movie, which we, of course, can't reveal, lies. Because, you know, finally, Tom's character has come to something like a full humanity. And it comes belatedly, and it leaves the boy bereft, and yet at least he saw a touch of what he hoped to really find in his father. And I think that's, you know, a significant thing.
Well, the timing of what happens between these two Sullivans is I think is unique, fascinating, because right about the age of 12 or so, by my experience, that's when you really start treating your son like a man, and you start talking about, whether it be hockey games or cars or books you've read, you start taking on a different sort of communicative style with them, because they're almost a man, and you're ushering them into it, and that was the part and parcel to what goes on between these two guys. He ends up learning the family business per se, and it's robbing banks. It could have been anything else. I almost thought that, you know, Michael Sullivan had a plan at some point for this young man.
Do you think at some point in his life he thought young Michael would move on into the family business too, or do you think he prayed to God he would go somewhere else?
Prayed to God that he would go somewhere else, but he was going to do that with my help. I was all set to just steer him off towards whatever that is, be it the armed forces or radio repair or something like that. But I was going to take him by the hand and say, now it's time that you're going to learn. You're going to see the future, my son, and it's going to be good for you. Just don't ask any questions about, you know, what goes on when I go to work. And that he failed at that, and he didn't have a chance to do the other thing as well.
I suspect that your character never had any plan for either of those boys except to go on into the family business.
True. Simple answer, simple question.
Well, one final thing. This really, to my taste, wonderful movie. I do think it's the best American movie of the year so far. It is coming out in the summertime. Apparently, Men in Black 2 did $80 million last week. Does that give any of you people any trepidation?
Not a whit. I mean, I'm glad that we're not letting the marketing people run all of show business as they see fit.
Point
Only
well
99%.
Point well taken.
Over and over again, the audience has shown up for the interesting movie that they've never seen before, no matter what time it is. And I mean, let's hope it opens to half the number. Nothing wrong with that. But even if it's not, I think it would be just criminal to have nothing but a certain type of movie play from the 15th of May to Labor Day, and more also just be depressed beyond recompense from Labor Day to the first week before Thanksgiving. If that's when all the depressing adult-themed movies come out, my God, we'd become a more of a bipolar society than we are already.
But what if it's the whole decade?
It just keeps going and going on like that. We can lay claim to the comic book connection. We are, you know, we did come from a graphic.
It's going to do.
It's part of Hollywood.
That's a point. Does the graphic novel look at all like your movie?
Not really, no. It's fantastically well drawn, but it doesn't have a similar look at all. There's a couple of shots I think that you could kind of point to, but partly because I didn't read the graphic novel. I read the script and I had the images for the movie before I picked up the graphic novel, but it's a wonderful piece of art. But I don't think I have anything to add to what Tom says about the movie opening in the summer. I think it's just, it can only be good, and I think it's very brave, and it's sort of, I take it as a sign of confidence in the movie, maybe wrongly, that they're releasing it in the summer. But otherwise, the last 6 weeks of the year are just, you can't see all the films, and it's it's just not possible to catch up apart from anything else.
Yeah. Jude?
You've always got to be able to go to a cinema and have the option to watch what kind of a film takes your fancy in that moment. And God forbid we live in a world where you can only go to the cinema and see one type of film, or
because it doesn't really exist in England. There isn't a sense of seasonal movies that
not at all.
Just open across the year. It doesn't matter what time of the, I mean, occasionally you get at the end of the year, kind of Oscar time. So that means that they tend to open in January, February. But other than that, they're across the year, and it seems healthy in a way.
Happy Christmas movies usually do come out at Christmas time.
I sell a lot of popcorn around this time of year.
By the way, it was Terry Press she's the one who came to me, who's head of View DreamWorks Marketing. She said the time to open this movie is in the middle of July, so it's not like we made this decision. We all banded together. We want the 12th of July.
Gotta be July.
Come on, we're powerful. You have to do what we say.
Well, it is true that the occasional dark movie, I think of Unforgiven, which came in early August. There is a kind of hunger for counter-programming that does begin to come upon a lot of us at this time of the year. I do want to thank everyone for showing up. In my long career in hanging around the movies, I've rarely been in a room with so much star power. But I've never been in a room where I've been happier to talk about the movie under discussion, because I think it is a superb movie. A movie of many dimensions and great beauty, and ornamented by marvelous acting. So I thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Richard.
Get well, Chuck.